After 97 days, that's almost 3 months of massive unrest in the island nation of Sri Lanka, it's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa who has now submitted his resignation. This happened shortly after he reached Singapore. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has resigned and he sent out an email handing in his resignation, an email that was received by the speaker, and the spokesperson has said this email came in hours after he landed in Singapore. Now, protesters overran his palace on the weekend, but Rajapaksa, who fled to Maldives on Wednesday, then left for Singapore on Thursday. In the meantime, the news that spread, celebrations broke out in Gotabaya, the epicenter of the anti-government protests. This is an area just close to the old parliament. People were seen singing and swaying to music, and the Sri Lankans hailing this as their victory. To get more on this, we have my colleague Shrija joining us from Ground Zero. Shrija, Rajapaksa is the first president to have resigned since Sri Lanka adopted a presidential system of government, which happened in 1978.
Well, that's right. In fact, speaking to some of the Sri Lankan citizens, what we understand from them from the ground is that every single time there has been a corruption angle involved with regard to the Rajapaksas, they have always fled the country or left from, not being answerable, especially to the citizens. But this could be for the first time where we understand Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been forced to resign with especially the Sri Lankan uprising, where everybody from the length and breadth of the country coming together demanding and asking him to go home and go out of power. So looks like, yes, he was under pressure. He clearly did not have much of a choice, and that's one reason why we understand he had to flee the country. Also ensure that there is a safe passage or safe exit for him and his family members, and then sent his resignation especially to the speaker. Yes, now Mr. Gotabaya has sent out his resignation to speaker, but however, the official announcement of Gotabaya Rajapaksa has still not been made. We understand that authentication of the resignation letter is still being done. That is something what we hear, and that we also understand Mr. Speaker will be announcing Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation today. The other political development, we also understand that the acting president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has informed Speaker that an all-party government must be formed immediately, and that everybody should arrive at a consensus to nominate for a Prime Minister. So which means he's very categorically clear, sending out a message to Sri Lanka that he is going to be the president, the acting president, and that a new Prime Minister will have to be appointed. Yes, we did in fact speak to Mr. Sajith Premadasa, who is the leader of
Wickremesinghe, whose resignation is also being demanded by protesters. He hasn't resigned. He's the acting president at the moment. He's asking for a prime minister to be appointed and not a president.
Well, that's one reason why we understand these protesters, in fact, went completely berserk. If you remember, just about 2 days ago, they were right outside Prime Minister's office. We could see the heavily guarded Prime Minister's office was completely breached by these very protesters after they learnt, they received the message that Mr. Prime Minister, that is Ranil Wickremesinghe, won't step down. He will continue as the acting Prime Minister. Now, that was one of the reasons, major reasons why we see Sri Lankans managed to breach, despite that heavily guarded, the heavy security that we witnessed on that particular day. They successfully breached that. They break open the gates. Also, they captured the Prime Minister's office. That was yet another message to send out to Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. If you do not go home or if you do not step down, we will capture political structures. But also, on the other hand, it's important to note that these are the very protesters who had captured in the last 1 week, especially Presidential Palace, the Temple Trees, the official residence of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and as well as the Prime Minister's office have now been vacated and handed over to the government. It's back in terms of the security forces guarding these political structures. But as far as Ranil Wickremesinghe is concerned, though chorus is continuing. Yes, we saw the celebrations in the air just late last night. The minute citizens heard, yes, Gotabaya has sent out the resignation, there was, singing, music, dancing, all on the streets of Sri Lanka. But when we spoke to these citizens, they say they're not going to go anywhere. They're just going to continue the protest until they see Ranil Wickremesinghe resign. Because all this while citizens have been demanding Ranil Wickremesinghe resign from Prime Minister post. But now we see he's the same person who's actually informing the Speaker that we all should arrive at a consensus, all parties should arrive at a consensus, should elect a Prime Minister. That's what he says. We should elect a Prime Minister, which means, on the other hand, he's going to remain as the acting president of Sri Lanka. So we understand at the moment, as we speak, things may not go well down here in Sri Lanka, because citizens say they will continue the protest until they see Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe go home.
Right.
If you're asking
Shrija,
what really
when we
is
talk
the reaction
about, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's now in Singapore, and Singapore's foreign ministry has confirmed that they're not allowing him they're not granting him asylum, not that he's asked for it, but it's just a private visit. We do know Saudi Airlines had taken him from the Maldives to Singapore. When is he expected to leave Singapore and go to perhaps Saudi Arabia, or maybe perhaps to the UAE?
Well, it's a conundrum at sorts right now, because there's no clarity. All that we know is Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been looking for a safe passage, a safe exit for him and his family. He's been hopping from one country to the other. But what we do know is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore has confirmed, saying that he is not seeking an asylum and he's here just on a private visit, which means, of course, it's going to be only for a short period of time, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, that he will be in Singapore. And yes, he did, of course, take a flight, a private jet, especially from Maldives to Singapore. What next? There are several reports that are doing rounds, that are surfacing, that he will be heading to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. But if that's going to happen, or if there's a change in plan, that is something not known at the moment. It's unpredictable, a very volatile situation, because, Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been receiving severe backlash. He's been trying to especially escape from being spotted from the civilians, and that's one of the reasons why we understand he had to take a military plane from here to Maldives. And of course, he had requested for a private jet. Initially, he was to fly, on a passenger plane, but then he had requested for a private jet, fearing backlash from citizens. So that could also be, and yet another reason, what we understand, that there are multiple change in plans. But for now, what we do know is that his final destination is supposed to be Jeddah, but looks like he's right now in Singapore. We will have to wait and watch what are the kind of developments that's going to come next.
Right, Shrija, the big question being, who will be the successor? The name of Premadasa is coming up. Is there anyone else in the running?
Well, at the moment, we understand his name has been surfacing with regard to, the prime ministerial post. Yes, of course, the opposition parties, most of them have arrived at a consensus. And we understand the SJB, which is the principal opposition that has maximum number of seats here in Sri Lanka. They have nominated Mr. Sajith Premadasa. Here, they've given his name. We understand, once again, a meeting will be called with the Speaker to discuss with regard to the nomination of the names. But if there are any more names, yes, there are several other names coming. But again, the question remains, who really has the maximum seats? If you're really looking at that, we understand Mr. Sajith Premadasa has in fact, got majorly a number of seats. And that's one of the reasons what we also understand, the name has been surfacing quite often, that Sajith Premadasa could be the next Prime Minister. Because initially, of course, the talk was about President, but now that the acting President himself says a Prime Minister must be appointed, we understand his office also confirms that they have nominated his name for the Prime Ministerial post.